This week we'll be talking about social cognition, thinking about people and situations. So social cognition is about how we think about other people, how we interpret their behaviors, what judgments we make as a result of that, and also how they influence us, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. So we'll be talking a lot about the research involved in social cognition. So what we look at in this area is how we make decisions, how we interpret events, and then how do we understand current events, how we assimilate old information and to help us understand new information, and even make predictions about future events. So we're going to be talking a lot about social judgments and ultimately how they influence our behaviors. Social cognition is great because it helps us to interact with people, helps us in our relationships. The problem is that sometimes they are inaccurate and prone to errors of bias, and we're going to be talking about some of those errors and biases. The social judgments that we make are unfortunately limited to the information that's available to us. So it's important to understand that we don't always get the accurate information. So most of us view others' behavior through a filter of our own past experiences and our expectations, and what's available in memory to us. And that can lead us to a lot of errors. So when we don't have enough information, then we might, for instance, make judgments about somebody's personality or character based on their physical appearance, something they're wearing, or a situation that they're in. That might lead us to make snap judgments. And it turns out that this is kind of a default for social cognition, is to make these snap judgments about people. So we're going to be looking at this study that was an interesting one. And what they did is they had subjects that were asked to look at photos and judge people based on these traits: trustworthiness, competence, likability, aggressiveness, and attractiveness. And this was adapted from a study by Willis and Todorov in 2006. So what they did is they did a baseline measurement as a comparison group, and they gave people as much time as they wanted to view these photographs. They said, look at these photographs for as long as you want, and please judge this person on their trustworthiness, competence, likability, aggressiveness, and attractiveness. And then they took people in three other conditions. One condition was this condition here, where it says 100 ms. That's comparable to 1/10 of a second. So they only let them view the pictures for 1/10 of a second, and then had them rate them on these characteristics. Another condition, they let them view the photograph for only a half a second. And then the last condition, the subjects were allowed to look at for a whole second, but just 1 second. And then they compared, they did a correlation coefficient between the baseline group's responses, their ratings of trustworthiness, competence, likability, aggressiveness, and attractiveness, and between these people in these conditions where they didn't have very much time. I would say 1 second is still a snap judgment, but you can kind of see that these correlations are really high. They're very high, more than you would expect. You would think there would be quite a discrepancy between a snap judgment and being able to view a photograph for as long as you want. But it looks like pretty much we rely on our snap judgments, that expression that you need to make a good first impression seems to actually be relevant, at least according to this study. Now here's another, this is taken from your book, and this kind of gives you an experiential way of kind of experiencing a study like that. So you can go through here, and it says review the photos and circle where you think the person would fall on the personality scales below. So this continuum is weak versus strong. So if you gave her a 10, you think she's very strong. A 1, you would be saying she's very weak, and everything in between. And they have given this actually this ranking system in experiments, and find that I'll go ahead and do it yourself, but you can kind of read down here that it seems like the more baby face woman right here tends to get ranked as weak, naive, and submissive down in the lower rankings here on these continually. And this gal here that has more of a square jaw, not as baby-faced features, generally gets rated in the strong, competent, dominant realms. So that's that idea that we tend to, when we see people with these more baby-faced features, we tend to judge them as more naive, even more likable sometimes, but even more easily manipulated and less dominant. We could make wrong judgments about people, places, and things because our personal experiences might be unrepresentative of what's really going on. For instance, you could make a judgment about a country that you visited when you only visited a few places there and met a few people. So the information that you have is limited, quite a bit limited. Another example would be to make a snap judgment about a person when you just meet them once without taking into consideration what their aggregate behavior might be, what it might be over several different instances. Now we're going to look at pluralistic ignorance, and this is an important one. It relates to group experience, and it relates to social comparison, comparing ourselves to other people. So here it's defined as a misperception of a group norm that results from observing people who are acting differently at variance with their private beliefs, and it's out of concern for what the social consequences might be. And then those actions reinforce the group norm, which is in error. So a good example for this, your book has talks about in the classroom, and it happens all the time. So your instructor is lecturing, and they're explaining a new concept that you've never heard of, and you don't understand it. You need clarification. You're feeling lost, but you don't raise your hand and say anything. You're just thinking, well, maybe I can find out later, because you look around and you think everyone else seems to be understanding this concept, and I don't want to stand out. I don't want people to think that I'm the only one in the room that doesn't get this. And guess what? There are a lot of other people in the room with the same hesitancy to stand out and speak up and look like they're wrong. So the consequences is that the whole group then, if everybody doesn't know what's going on, but nobody speaks up and asks for clarification, then everybody is in ignorance over that. And this applies even to, there's been some research in the area of perceptions about drinking behavior. When they asked university students, including university students at CU, how much and how often they thought their classmates drank, and then they asked them how much and how often they drank personally, and they compared it. Everyone was thinking that everybody else was much more of a partier than they were, that they were drinking in greater quantities and more often than they were. And unfortunately, this kind of pluralistic ignorance will sometimes result in individuals actually drinking more than they would have to feel like they are more like other people who they perceive as the norm, when in fact they're not the norm. Most of you have probably heard of the self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's a tendency for people to act in ways that bring about the very thing that they expect to happen. So that could be an expectation that something good is going to happen, where the self-fulfilling prophecy is a positive phenomenon, but it can also work against you. If you expect something bad to happen, you can act in such a way that it will cause it to happen. So in order for the prophecy to be self-fulfilling, there has to be some mechanism that translates that expectation, that's a cognition, transforms it into an action that would tend to confirm the prophecy. So for instance, the mechanism, remember in the study with the elementary school children that were identified as being especially bright at the beginning of the year, and the expectancy effects of the teachers became the mechanism that actually caused them to excel throughout the school year based on how the teacher interacted with them because of the expectations that the teacher had. So secondhand information, not just our own observations, our own limited information, but sometimes we get information from outside sources which is wrong, and we can be influenced by that, and sometimes even accommodate that secondhand information into our own memories and beliefs. So it can come from gossip, news accounts, books, magazines, lots of information out there on the internet. And secondhand information can come in the form of propaganda or ideological distortions as well. From individuals that might want to influence you in a certain way. So you can think about political propaganda or even just social propaganda. Some of the most misleading secondhand information that we get comes from the media, so TV, newspaper, that have an overemphasis on the bad news. We don't hear so much about all of the good things that happen on a given day. So the media tends to focus on vivid examples or information that is presented for shock value, to grab your attention or to entertain you. And that leads to what we call the bad news bias. So when you take in all of this information constantly about all of the bad things that are happening in the world, and there are bad things, but if there's an overemphasis on it, or you actually don't just learn about it once, but you see it several times over and over and over again, it's almost like you can re-traumatize yourself by putting yourself in the same mind frame as you were during a trauma kind of thing, so that it distorts your perception of the world to the point where you might think that you're more at risk in the world. The world's a much more dangerous place than it really is, and that you're more at risk for being a victim in it as a result of that. Now, it's important to understand how impactful it is, how the manner in which information is presented, and we're going to be talking about that